In Elseworlds, heroes are taken from their usual settings and put into strange times and places, some that have existed or might have existed, and others that can't, couldn't, or shouldn't exist. The result is stories that make characters who are as familiar as yesterday seem as fresh as tomorrow. Elseworlds can be fun, to see how our favorite characters would act in these different scenarios. Like, what if Batman was a vampire? Or if Batman was a pirate? Or what if 15th century Commonwealth Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell lived for an extra decade, increasing England's power and creating a modern American colony as an authoritarian oligarchy theocracy? Also, Batman is a priest. Gotham by Gaslight was the first book in the Elseworlds series. Taking place in 1889, Bruce Wayne comes back to Gotham City the same time as real-life London serial killer Jack the Ripper. Its sequel, Master of the Future, takes place 2 years later. Gotham City is hosting a World's Fair, and Batman has retired, only to come back to save Gotham one more time. Instead of having another serial killer storyline, one inspired by real-life Chicago World's Fair killer H.H. Holmes, Master of the Future instead introduces a much more light-hearted villain with a plan that resembles the older, campier comics of the 1950s. There was a third issue in the Gaslight universe published 10 years ago, and yeah, we're not going to talk about that. The movie decided to combine the storylines from the two books, where a Jack the Ripper native to Gotham City, not London, is killing women in the streets, sending cryptic notes to the newspapers in time of the Gotham World's Fair, and that's about where the similarities end. The movie seemed to have wanted to use the Gaslight world to make their own story. The story they came up with seemed a little familiar.
Vengeance blackens the soul, Bruce. I always feared you would become that which you fought against.
Beloved, avenge not yourselves. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord.
What the heck am I doing, Alfred? This isn't part of the plan. I must be going nuts.
If I may make so bold, Master Bruce, I'd say quite the reverse.
Women are a distraction from the mission, Alfred.
So you've said.
The artwork between the two books would change literally by day and night. In the first book, the artwork was done by Mike Mignola, before his creation of the Hellboy series. He gave this world this large, hard-edged form with a Batman costume looking homemade and stitched together. P. Craig Russell did the inking and shading in the art, putting most of these pages in shadows, and the writer Brian Augustyn chose to make Batman silent through most of the book's action, but gave Jack the Ripper a pretty detailed internal monologue, where the movie decided to make Jack entirely silent and Batman the talkative one. The dark, shadowy panels is where the book is at its best, creating this foggy, dreary landscape with a Batman that actually is pretty frightening, as opposed to the adaptation trying to achieve that same fear factor.
I think we might have broken, boys.
The bat!
Maybe just man. The sequel, Master of the Future, is the total opposite. Art is now done by Eduardo Barreto. The entire comic takes place during the day. The panels are a lot more colorful. It feels almost like an entirely different world. The artwork is really good, very detailed. There were some artistic choices that played around with the duality of Batman and Bruce Wayne, and Steve Olive's shading added some really nice depths in the interior shots and the panels. But this one panel here is, you're in the middle of a burning building and you look like you're about to join the gun show's dog for a cup of coffee. The movie begins with a couple shots of how Gotham would look as a late 19th century setting. Where the rigid art style was borrowed from the first comic, this made the movie have this jolted, sharp angle look, kind of like the old animated series. It works really well for the establishing shots. I mean, just look at Arkham Asylum. It's insane.
That's a terrible pun.
It's not a pun, it's a double entendre!
Whatever, it's still terrible.
Yeah.
And the fight scenes up close look really good, but then we come to something like Poison Ivy's dancing, it's kinda awkward to watch. While the first book kept the comic book cameos to a minimum, the second book gave entirely different characters. The movie decided to take the route of that third comic I'm not mentioning, and jam the Gaslight world with a whole bunch of references, making this pretty appropriate to see in April with all these Easter eggs lying around. I'm actually surprised the Joker didn't make an appearance in the movie since he was one of the few references in the first book. The storyline for the first book and movie rely on the mystery of who Jack the Ripper is, with each given their own interpretation. While the book makes the twist pretty obvious who the Ripper is, the drama of Bruce Wayne being framed for the killings and the steps taken to reveal the mystery is played out well. It's refreshing to see Batman, the world's greatest detective, actually doing some detective work. The movie decided to be more action-oriented, which worked well for the fight scenes, but when it came time for the world's greatest detective, one that was mentored by Sherlock Holmes to solve the mystery, it was solved mostly by coincidence. And though the twist on who Jack the Ripper was a huge surprise, it was a twist that didn't really make any sense at all.
That's right! It's a twist!
No, it's a lie. A lie is not a twist.
In the end, both book and movie are okay. Just okay. One's a decent short comic with an interesting premise, and the other is a short movie in an interesting world. I was honestly surprised this book had a fairly strong audience. This movie wasn't the first time this story was given an adaptation treatment. Day One Studios was in development of a Gotham by Gaslight video game, with concept art and even test footage made. Unfortunately, the Batman rights couldn't be bought, so the project was shelved. The positivity around Gotham by Gaslight mostly stems from the fans of steampunk. Steampunk is a subgenre of fiction that falls into the realm of retrofuturism, an art form that takes inspiration from a past time period's idea on what the future would look like. It branched off in the 1980s from another genre, cyberpunk, which as a broad definition is science fiction, where technology is extremely immersed in the story's culture, but is juxtaposed by the hardships of the story's protagonists. Blade Runner is a good example. Ready Player One is kinda. In steampunk, the technology in the story runs on the steam engine, hence the name, which its widespread use in real life brought on the Industrial Revolution. If a steampunk story setting is in the future, the internal combustion engine or the microchip are never really invented. This creates the retro in the retrofuturism. Robots exist but run on clock gears. Zeppelins are used instead of airplanes. The internal combustion engine, technically created in the late 1700s, wasn't commercially viable until the early 1900s. It paved the way for faster technology and ultimately a different culture for the 20th century, and the end of the Victorian era. Steampunk, whether future or not, tends to live in the culture of the Victorian era, showcasing sometimes romanticizing the positive aspects of that era: technology improvement, political and economic reform, wider access to literature, and normally glosses over or doesn't mention the less than stellar aspects. Steampunk art has made some interesting contributions in movies, video games, and even music. The books and the movie don't really advertise themselves as steampunk Batman. Both tend to stick with a very grounded story outside of a grappling hook being used. The technology tends to steer clear of any future tech, though the second book went all out, with a robot Zeppelin driver and a sun-powered laser. The concept art for the Almost video game showed the artist Julie Farrell was having a lot of creative freedom with the game. This was a game I was really looking forward to working on. Unfortunately, it was just a pitch. I had a blast creating the menus for this game, as steampunk is really quite unique, interesting, and something I love to design. In the end, Gotham by Gaslight is the closest there is for a steampunk Batman, until DC lets another artist run around in the world for another comic. There's definitely a lot of artists that are loving the concept. This is CB Smith, and thanks for taking a page.